edition of the Omnis Hour. Slap this music down to a nice little background. Hopefully it won't bug you too much while I'm talking to you. Okay, so today we're going to be continuing the story that I introduced last time, the evolution of consciousness in the multiverse. Tying together what's obvious to scientists who are, observing the latest discoveries in quantum mechanics, particle physics, and astrophysics, and trying to make some sense of it in the context of atheism or creationism, as it were. And I'm going to tell you what really went down. And you're welcome to argue or dispute what I tell you, but not reject it out of hand, as so many are inclined to do these days, who have very strong opinions that they don't want to talk about. Okay, so let's delve in. I'm going to call this one For God So Loved the Multiverse. And I think you'll understand why as we get into it. So let's do a quick recap of where we left the last session. As you remember, we were talking about how the multiverse got started, how physical universes were created as a result of the first two universes of the Big Bang. Now, that got pretty far in creation, but what was going on at that point in terms of creation was these God souls, these original souls of pure consciousness, who invented this game and were persuaded to play it as either a game or as a continuation of the mental battles that they were having in the spiritual realm. Okay? And where we got with this was basically a point where these two universes, the universe and the anti-universe, got filled out by new inventions that were tested and proven in, and as I mentioned, karma had the task of collecting the best ideas that both sides had agreed, this is the way it needs to work because we tried everything else and that doesn't seem to work. And that's how hydrogen got its properties. That's how helium got its properties. That's how lithium got its properties. That's how stars were created, and the parameters around how big they were and how long they could burn under a given fuel before they had to switch and start fusing another element. What happens when that element runs out? Well, we need another element. And because not all of this matter was in stars, there was properties of matter that would be existing in planets. Accretions of matter which didn't have enough mass to start stellar combustion. And that created the opportunity for souls to specialize in chemistry. This is how chemistry was invented. You mix things in a test tube and you see what happens. This was early science, before these creators even knew they were doing science. They were kind of like little kids making mud cakes in a puddle. This is how conscious these old gods were at that point. They had very, very spirited arguments with each other, but their arguments were very much like the arguments of a family. Oh, Daddy's favoring this one. Well, the brother hurt me, hurt my feelings. Daddy, what are you going to do to punish him? Souls were like that, and they still are like that. You've seen it in, I mean, you can be the most accomplished scientist, the most intelligent writer, the most published artist, the absolute thesis of intelligentsia today, and you still come home for Christmas or Thanksgiving and you have these horrible arguments with your family over what are very trivial matters. Doesn't change. Gods are not above that. And anyone who thinks they are isn't, I mean, you just aren't thinking about this whole thing rationally. Okay, you want somebody to be perfect. Yeah, I understand that. That's a desire that comes in every child. And the realization that your parents aren't perfect is what spoils their godhood for you. Hasn't changed. Okay, so we got to this point where we have this multiverse, this universe pair developing all these processes of stellar dynamics, chemistry, basically all the laws of physics, which we're in the process of codifying and discovering nuances to right now. And if you follow the journals of forefronts of science, they're still discovering new compounds that have interesting properties that we never knew, new materials, new isotopes that have surprising properties. There's always a lot more to discover. New particles that we're now seeing. We're finally generating enough energy in CERN to discover. Hey, I was involved in that too. I worked at Fermilab during one of my summer internships, so I know a fair amount about particle physics too, interestingly enough. At any rate, this game at that point was played by the creators, if you will, these senior souls that had existed before physical creation started, and there were a lot of them. As we mentioned, it was getting kind of harder to make any more of them because you couldn't get, they sort of devolved into two main camps that pretty much exerted their spiritual energy to prevent the other side from creating more allies, as you would do if you could create more souls as kind of toy soldiers that you could use in your battles against your opponents. And that, in the early versions of the multiverse, was how it worked. Now, souls could come and inhabit. This is how reincarnation started. Rather than just from on high pushing these things around, it became the fashion to go actually inhabit them, so that your favorite planet, you could actually feel what it was like to be that planet for a time. And you had more direct control over what was going on in that planet because you were embodying that planet or that star or that galaxy. And that became a much more effective way to exert control than just trying to use your spiritual energy from afar, because, as we've said, spiritual energy has properties much like material energies. And if you know anything about the forces of the material world, you know that they diminish with distance. Okay, so it became a matter of if you wanted to succeed in this game and outcompete your siblings in creation, you had to be participating in it. And this is how it continued. And the laws that govern star formation, evolution, and collapse came out of that. The laws that govern matter how it's created by fusion, how it's changed by fission, how it's changed by chemical processes, was to a large extent defined during this period and codified into, okay, this is a set of laws that everybody agrees works best. Let's stick to these laws. Let's make these the boundary conditions of this game, because that is what both sides have agreed to makes a good set of rules for a game. And anybody who knows anything about game theory knows that games only work if you have rules. And rules must be designed to make sure that the players don't cheat too much, and that the game is relatively fair so people will actually want to play it. You can make the most wonderful game in the world, and if the only people that ever play it do it solitaire, kind of defeats the whole point of the game. Although there are people that prefer to play games solitaire. I'm one of them. So, at any rate, at this point, both sides kind of began hankering for some better way of playing this game. It's like, well, there's nothing new to discover under the sun. We've discovered all these elements. We've discovered all these chemicals. We've discovered this, discovered that. We're bored. And some bright soul then came up with the idea of, well, we could possibly go a step further to these chemical processes and actually devise some materials that became self-evolving. And this is when DNA was invented, RNA, and experimented with and perfected. And it's still being experimented with and perfected to this very day. This is how DNA has gotten so complicated. This is why there is so much junk DNA that we're not sure what it does. It's all part of this creation that was felt to be, well, that was pretty useful. Let's keep it around in case we need to turn it on again. And these gods, if you will, know how to turn on and off DNA, like a light bulb. And they know exactly which switches to flip to get the particular soul vehicles that they want to have. Now, some of that happened through natural evolution. Soul vehicles can adapt themselves to the environment without the interference of one of these creative souls. This is how natural evolution happens. It's, again, a karmic process. Something is out of balance with the environment, and nature naturally seeks to restore the balance. Species naturally seek to become more in harmony with their environment. But that's only half of the process. That can also be the direct result of manipulation. Spiritual manipulation, but also manipulation by energies that are directed by spirit. So, we're at a point here where the next phase of this overall plan that God had needed to go into effect, because what we're at, where we're at now is we've got these souls who existed before physical creation. They're now involved, very deeply engrossed in this game of souls, this manipulation of the physical universes and creations of vehicles, essentially, for their own consciousness, so they can experience this physical reality, which is, it's a more fun game than mental masturbation. It has consequences. You have limitations. Some people say, well, I wouldn't want to have limitations. Well, you may think that because you've never been a disembodied consciousness. You've never known what it's like to taste an air cake and realize, you know what? That really doesn't taste as real as the cakes that I've had when I was incarnated in my favorite species on my favorite planet. Trust me, it became very, very, very popular. And yes, there are souls that still resist playing the game and incarnating physically, but most of them, by this point, had become very avid players. It was the social media of the day. You get back to heaven and you didn't have experiences to talk about in the physical realm, and you were kind of considered, you know, lazy couch potato in heaven. At any rate, the situation at this point, though, was that these consciousnesses had full awareness. When they would incarnate, they would sort of embody a planet or a galaxy or whatever, exert very tight control over this collection of mass for some period of time, and then when they tired of that game, they would just leave that body and go back to this spirit world, go back to the disembodied consciousness they were. And so basically incarnation much more closely resembled what we would consider demonic possession at that point. And what is, in fact, still what is demonic possession. When a soul can walk into a collection of matter and walk out, that is a manifestation of one of these souls that is still working under that first version of the incarnation experience. And there are many, many souls like that, especially a lot of the ones that were on the Borg team, who chose to let their consciousness be dominated by another of their older siblings and follow their orders. And this is the essence of possession, which is a subject we've talked about elsewhere, so I'm not going to go deep into that. At any rate, most of the players were becoming dissatisfied because even though they'd invented some pretty powerful incarnation vehicles, it was still the case that those who had the most inventions under their belt, who knew the most about how to get the most mileage out of an incarnation vehicle, such that they could dominate an entire species, groups of species, to go conquer parts of a galaxy, we're still lording it over other players that weren't that talented, and mucking with their experiments, mucking with their little sandcastles, and no matter how remote their little planet, perfect planet was that they tried to develop and nurture. And I mean, if you've ever played one of these city or kingdom building simulations like Sim City, The Sims, you know what this is like. There are some players that just want to be left alone, want to have their own little simulated world and not have anybody fuck with it. And there's others that want to be all in the middle of the fucking and screwing each other over and trying to throw pies in each other's face, and that's how they get their kicks. This was all very true of these original souls. So, there was great consternation both on God's team and Borg's team because of this. Borg's team didn't like being dominated and controlled by others. They wanted to do all the domination and control themselves and be rewarded by their overlord for being a good servant, but not basically involved in tugs of war between different Dark Lords who each wanted to build their own army of clones. And on God's side, you had, your more creative people who actually wanted to make this multiverse thing a better thing. More advanced soul vehicles, able to create new kinds of art, new kinds of technology, science. This was all happening in that regime. And it was all happening with the knowledge of the first creator, of God, of Borg, and of this battle going on. And yes, a lot of the creativity was directed at military applications, which turned out to have dual use, as we've seen with our own technology recently. So I'm not telling you anything that hasn't already been demonstrated by our species on this little planet Earth. Okay, well, at this point, we basically had gotten to the point where God's team had their own little planets, their own little area of space where they were concentrated on doing their experiments and trying to keep them in communication or isolated to the extent that they required for whatever they were working on. And this space where God's team was kind of centered, not all of it, but kind of like the nexus of God's power, was a galaxy called the Milky Way now. And certainly there were Borg outposts there, and there was a tenuous balance of power in that galaxy. But for the most part, other galaxies were pretty much overrun by Borg. Had been either, made sterile, such an unfun place to play that no conscious soul would play there, and they were just executing the program of the virtual souls that made up the bulk of the matter there. That's how it came out. The structure of the universe that we see, the organization of galaxies, all resulted from this earlier period of experimentation with these kind of soul vehicles, the big, the very big, and the very small, and how they interacted. And once those experimental realms became less interesting, they sort of fell by the wayside, and nobody, for the most part, took the effort to use up the time and effort it took to instantiate a thing like DNA in a galaxy so remote that had certainly many resources, but resources weren't an issue at this point. And all the fun in the game was being had in this place called the Milky Way. That's where the battle was being pressed. There were certainly other galaxies where either Borg's team or God's team were sort of using as staging grounds, using for experiments that they wanted to keep very isolated. I don't know the details of all those. what I'm going to tell you about is essentially how day 7 of creation got started. Because essentially what I'm telling you now is we've gotten through the 6 days of creation that are described in the Bible. It's the 7th day where the Bible just falls flat on its face. And everybody knows that. It wasn't perfect after 6 days, and God went and took a good nap after being so tired from 6 days of creation. No, 6 days of co-creation had happened, of which God was just one of the participants. A very important participant, a very influential participant, but without any special power, without any special privilege. Well, maybe with 1 or 2 exceptions. God retained the power of veto. What's the power of veto? To a creator, it's the ability to uncreate anything you've created. And this is what sort of gives God, kind of an ace in the hole. Nobody's actually sure if he can uncreate, but nobody wants to press it because they've seen a pretty reasonable demonstration of it or heard of it through their siblings. And I talk more about that in my book, so I'm not going to go back to that story. But anyway, there's a certain fear of God that all souls have in the spiritual realms because of this threat of uncreation. That, if God ever really got pissed off with what his family had done, he could start over. Would he? Could he? I don't know. I mean, things are progressed so far, I doubt that the kill switch would ever be pushed. But then again, who knows? Have you pushed God as far as he has been in the past? Children. Or have you started learning your lessons and working with the All-Father instead of against him? We'll see. So, at this point, God himself had a favorite system, a favorite planet that he'd been working on for a long time. Now, by this time, he'd lost a lot of his respect. Everybody, was kind of like, well, gosh, look at all the stuff we've created. God's not going to uncreate all that. And look, he's not even pushing his weight around. He's off in the weeds here in the distant arm of this Milky Way galaxy, working on his little experiment and, not even pulling in the help of very many of his family. Oh yeah, there's some hanging around him that like to be around him, but gosh, the rest of God's team is off inventing their own things in their own galaxies, their own parts of the Milky Way. I think we can pretty much write these guys off and, let's focus on fighting the ones that are doing the most fight to us. And there were a large portion of God's team that had sort of gotten wrapped up in this battle. And the war became more important than what the war was over. Do you remember when I told you the war was over? See? You're probably already thinking of it as an us versus them and have decided which side you're on. But in fact, the war was over how to govern souls. Whether a government of souls should tend towards absolute freedom or absolute slavery. The whole point of creation was solving this problem, not as an either or, but solving it together. Coming up with the best government for souls, the efforts of both sides, both points of view, neither of which was a very reasonable point of view, a very sensible point of view. Because if souls have absolute freedom, then they can do anything. And if they can do anything, then they can hurt each other in any way they want. And say, well, I was just, using my free will. I was exercising the law of attraction to draw what I wanted to me. The other side, absolute slavery. If you want to control everybody else, well, you can try, but they're going to resent that. They're going to fight back. You're going to create struggles. Maybe not right away, but eventually there will be some number of souls that you're exerting this slave lord influence over, even if it's backed up by mind control games. They will rebel. It's inevitable. And so, focusing on the battle only ensures that the war will never end. And is that a bad thing? Well, actually, no, because it's the war itself, the conflict of this grand battle, which is the pressure that keeps creation going. Which is why God allowed it to happen. If God wanted everything to be peaceful and love, and he would have just blasted every soul that did something bad to one of their siblings. Say, look, that's what happens if you misbehave. God didn't do that, huh? Doesn't do that. Would a good parent do that? Well, most people will agree that a good parent, although they can be a tough love parent, and God certainly was, would not simply kill any child who disobeyed an order, or stepped on their siblings' toes, or poked them in the eye. Okay, so at this point, what God was really working on is getting everybody set up for the next phase of the plan. Okay, here's how it played out. What was happening at the same time is that so much had been created and kind of left to run on its own that there was a lot of things happening just because these processes, these physical processes, were following their programmed course, and galaxies were running into other galaxies. Black holes were sucking in stars. And the automated mess that this big family had created was taking a large amount of their effort just trying to keep what was going on automatically from mucking with what they were trying to do consciously. And many people, especially on the God side, but even on the Borg side, were like, you know what? We need to have some way of this other matter getting more conscious. So it's got the ability to, subcontract management of things to keep them from getting in the way of what we really want to focus on. What if we could come up with a system that allowed some of these zero-level program souls, the virtual souls, to develop enough consciousness to run more complicated programs and actually manage themselves to a large extent, so that we wouldn't constantly be having to take over their bodies and make them do this or that for a while, or take over a whole species to make them do this or that for a while, which was very spiritual energy consuming thing to do. And so this was discussed amongst these consciousnesses as, how are we going to make this game more fun now? We've gotten it to the point where it is, and it's been great fun getting here, but the game is kind of souring on everybody. And this is when God introduced his next big idea. It says, here's how we do it. Let's allow the souls that are part of the entity we possess to learn and grow like we do, so long as we are embodying the oversoul that contains them. So, if I'm the oversoul of a star, within that star, I can grow more conscious other souls that are very familiar with stellar dynamics and can run a star and can execute simple programs like accelerating the burn of a star so that it doesn't go supernova or turn into a black hole. It simply consumes itself and becomes some kind of a dwarf. And then it is less dangerous to the other stars and galaxies which it might be heading toward. Or even an intervention like making a course correction. This galaxy is heading for this galaxy. They're going to be impacting each other. But if this galaxy has a soul directing it, a high consciousness soul, this power of that spiritual energy can redirect it and make sure they don't collide. Okay, so this is one piece of the proposal, that these other souls could learn and start contributing in their own right. And then there would be enough higher consciousness souls to really manage everything, and the old gods, the old souls, could focus on what they wanted to focus on. Now, there was, of course, concern. Well, if we let these other souls learn and grow, they could become as great as we are and have the same powers we do, and we don't want to create competition. God said, don't worry about that. We're going to give them another new law. Instead of just being able to jump into any soul vehicle they want and participate in that incarnation for as long as they want and retain full memory, I'm going to introduce reincarnation amnesia. In other words, these souls don't get to learn the way you guys did. Every time they move to another form, they're going to forget what they learned, and they're going to have to start at consciousness level 0 again and work their way back up in a different form to a level of consciousness where they have more spiritual power, more spiritual awareness. And this should keep them from ever developing to be competition for you, or at least be competition for you until they're probably better able to handle the tasks than you are. And pointing out some of the mistakes and foibles of some of the senior souls, Borg himself, God shamed them into saying, you know what, yeah, I think if we give them that limitation, if they can overcome that and somehow become as powerful as us, well, I guess they do deserve to be creators in their own right. Thinking that nobody could possibly do that, and that if they tried to, they would get in their way. So this is how the first version of the real Game of Souls started, with the idea of reincarnation amnesia and the opportunity for all souls, even these programmed virtual souls, 0-level virtual souls, to advance through reincarnation and karma. This was a very difficult thing to sell to enough souls to gain the spiritual energy to make it happen. And it finally got to the point where, God decided that I've got to throw something else out here. I've got to throw something else that is going to convince everyone that this idea needs to pass. And what he threw out was, look, I am so certain that this is a good idea that it's going to produce a new set of gods which are better than all of you old bastards. I will take this new pill of reincarnation amnesia myself. I will demonstrate to you how well this works as a training system to make souls better creators, more conscious creators, more responsible creators than you guys are. And if I'm wrong, you're never going to see me as a god again. That's taking a risk. And I welcome any of my team who wants to come with me to join me. If that's what it takes to prove to you that this is a better way. I'm not going to force anyone to take this bitter pill of reincarnation amnesia. Effective term limits, because the soul vehicle then needs to be sort of monitored for how long you have to be stuck in it. And this was the other piece of things, that different soul vehicles now came with sort of a term limit, a minimum and a maximum time that the soul had to be resident there before they could effectively commit suicide or naturally die and get a chance at another soul vehicle, get a chance at another experience so they could learn more. Okay, well, this sold Borg big time, because Borg thought, hey, this gives me an incredible advantage, because as long as it takes God to get back to the level of a senior creator, an equal to me and my team, my senior leadership team, he and anybody that joins him are going to be like on the sideline. This is great. Gives me a whole bunch of time to win this war, and all I have to do is keep an eye out for any soul that's getting a little bit too conscious for their own good, and bash them down before they can advance enough to become a god. Puts me back in the driver's seat. Borg was just thrilled with this idea, and so he signed up to it. And there were a lot of other details that had to be worked out. I'm not going to go into all of that. One thing that did happen before all this went down is God had a little side conversation with Karma. Now, if you remember, Karma was God's first child, the first other soul that he personally created. And she was a zero-level virtual soul. She was programmed to do what God told her. And God had told her, just watch. Watch all your siblings, watch me, and learn from our behavior. And you be the one to decide what behaviors seem useful and what seem not useful. And she had been the one that decided which laws would be approved or not approved. Even if both sides had voted for, the atomic number of element X being 33, she had the final say. And as a programmed party designed to weigh evidence equally, that worked pretty well. She vetoed a lot of things that, both sides wanted, but would have made the war more likely to create mental issues amongst the participants. And yes, there were many, many mental issues among these old consciousnesses. If you think mental illness is a problem in the human race, you should have seen it back then. Having your favorite planet destroyed 1,000 times by a sibling that just doesn't like you. Imagine what that would do to your psyche. So anyway, God had a little side conversation with Karma, and he said, you know what? I'm going to change your programming a little bit. This time, during this experiment, now you keep on doing what you've been doing, evaluating physical laws. But this time I want you to evaluate spiritual laws, social laws of these souls. And I want you to observe how these souls that are using reincarnation to learn behave, what works well, what doesn't work well, and develop a set of social laws to go with the physical laws of the universe, of the multiverse. No, the multiverse was only 2 universes at this point. And while you're doing that, I want you to also observe, you're not going to know where I'm incarnated. I'm not going to know that I'm incarnated because I have reincarnation amnesia. But I leave it to you, doing this watching, developing these laws, social laws, government laws of souls, to keep an eye out. And when you believe that you have found the incarnation of your Father, and you know me better than any other soul in the whole multiverse, don't you? Because you've been in my mind the whole time. When you get to that point that you recognize your Father, I want you to come out and stop being a virtual soul. I want you to start incarnating too, like me. And you get to learn how to be a god in the new system. And she did. Now, the other piece I have to tell you about this is the other reward that was held out for going to this new system, for people wanting to try it out like God did, is that God said the other reward you'll get for participating in this system and advancing through reincarnation to full godhood again is the chance to have your own universe. Instead of being limited to creation within the universe anti-universe pair of the Big Bang, when you advance to God level next, you have your own universe of creation. You can conduct your experiments to your heart's content without any interference from any soul that you don't want to belong there. If necessary, you can use all virtual souls to make whatever you want as toy soldiers and have your personal nirvana. Or you can still come back and incarnate in the spiritual realm or the realm of the universe anti-universe pair to interact with other souls, to conduct joint experiments, to play with your brothers and sisters. So you got the best of all worlds. That's what you get if you master this new system, which nobody's forcing you to participate in. All voluntary, free will. Okay, so this was how day 7 of creation started. And I can tell you that it began long, long, long before the human race. Long, long before the first hominid species. It did begin, and God's experiment was totally centered on this star system. This is his baby. This is where all the big stuff went down. All of the God-level species originated here and became corrupted as they moved away from this holy planet, moved away from what effectively was the center of God's spiritual power, which, as you can imagine, has been much diminished during day 7 of creation when God was incarnating, reincarnating over and over and over, trying to learn how to be a god again in this new system which karma was developing. Now, karma herself had an interesting path through this. So she began developing the laws of karma and was instituting them pretty much as she discovered them and decided, yeah, this is going to work. Now, she had to get enough spiritual energy behind it to sell it. So she did have to sell the ideas to her siblings, the ones that were still conscious gods in heaven, who hadn't taken on the reincarnation amnesia. The early laws of karma tended to be very Borgish, very harsh, authoritarian. And good examples of this are the Code of Hammurabi and the Ten Commandments. If you've read those closely, they are generally good ideas, but can be very, very harsh in implementation and can be misused by an authoritarian like a Borg. And in fact, this portion of day 7 was one where Borg's team did gain the upper hand and even gained a lot of influence with Karma herself, who maybe didn't know her father as well as she thought, because at some point she found a soul that had grown to be a god and decided must be her father, her real father. Turned out it was not. It was Lucifer, the male demiurge, one of God's team, but one who was very, very much consumed with the battle itself, and had been so consumed with being against the Borg team that they were basically pursuing enlightened authoritarianism, which I think if anyone who's familiar with the God of the Old Testament and the machinations of the Elohim would agree is a very authoritarian bunch. There's not a lot of evidence of the real God that I tell you about, because that real God was off in the weeds learning how to be a god again, doing the same thing as you, being born again and again in different species. And I can tell you about some of those lives, and they were not that pleasant. Being born on a strange, dark planet with purple skies into a species that was, resembled sort of a panther, but had no sex. I was an alpha of that species. An alpha, not male, not female, just an alpha. The best hunter of my pack, the leader. Till I broke my leg and they ate me. I was around when the dinosaurs were destroyed by an asteroid. I was one of the survivors in that life, actually. At least for a while. What I experienced of it was the loss. The sudden change of everything normal into this crazy new world where my feet were burning and there was no water to be found, and my family were all dead. I was frantically looking for any of my kind. I've experienced that. I've been around for a long time, trying to find my way to Godhood. Now, am I one of the ones that went with God? God, I don't know. I'm still waking up. But what I do know is that everything I'm telling you is the gospel truth. I've been there. Now, what happened is, and what you see in the Bible is evidence, and people are already understanding this. These are other God species, previous God species that developed during the seventh day of creation. While the real God, everybody thought had disappeared and was never going to come back. And effectively, the memory of the real God was lost. Or faith was put in this stand-in God that was picked by karma as her father. By mistake. This Lucifer cat, who's not really a bad guy, but has just, well, like a precocious teenager, gotten too wrapped up in his career for his own good. And he's manifested in all sorts of, Zeus. He dabbles as Buddha. He's been all sorts of gods of all sorts of civilizations. So has karma. She's learned herself the lessons that her father could never teach her. She's been Athena, the goddess of wisdom. That's one of the incarnations, I think, closest to her true nature and her true purpose that God gave her before he turned her loose and let her find her own way. And if there was any original sin, that would have to have been it. Keeping karma as a level 0 programmed soul for so long. But I think you'll see that it was necessary. And she's learned a lot in the process. And she has come to recognize the incarnations of her real father. And her work in defining karma has become very refined. She is the one who basically drove the religious epiphanies of the Greco-Roman period, where these old gods who represented fire or the sun or thunder or these strong physical forces, those were effectively how the old gods manifested. They manipulated through intimidation and fear or lust. And if you look at the late Roman Empire, you will notice that there was a tendency to deify virtues. Began with, the Greek muses. Apollo was the god of music and art, and he had these 12 muses who represented all the different arts and sciences, and who didn't have the nasty side of a soul's nature, the grasping, greedy, addiction-prone side. Well, obviously you can't divorce that from anybody. That's the whole silliness of the Buddhist idea. The Buddhist ideal says that, we have a higher soul, that we can leave our ego behind. This is absolute bullshit. This is a Borg fantasy that leaves people either pretending, playing it virtue signaling fantasies, or disappointed in not being able to live up to their traditions or their guru's idea of perfection. The whole oneness movement is a Borg fantasy. It's designed to basically separate you from your identity, your real identity, and give you fake identities. And that's exactly what's going on with the cultural Marxism of the woke cult. And it is a cult. They are trying to separate you from your own natural, organic identity and put you into identity groups that they can weaponize. Why? Because we are at the end of day 7 of creation. How do I know? Because I'm telling you all this stuff. I've seen it. It's here. Karma and God have finally gotten together again, and there's no misunderstanding between them. The male demiurge, Lucifer, I've communed with him. We speak telepathically. He understands. He doesn't necessarily agree, but he understands that a new era is beginning. The female demiurge, she's a little bit less supportive of the whole thing, but I've met her, and I can tell you that she knows when she's been licked. Pardon my French. I've met them both, and they know that we're ready to go on to this next phase of creation. Now, it may seem very chaotic right now to you, and it is, because what's happening is that all these souls incarnated in the human species, the chosen species, are no longer needed to be in this experiment. If you remember me talking about how social experiments need to be done, the participants can't know about the experiment. Why am I able to tell you about all this now? Because the experiment is over. We're in the cleanup phase. What happens during the cleanup phase? Well, you've got a whole bunch of souls here in the human species that are mainly here to cover all the corner cases of this test. You've got to have the best souls, the worst souls. You've got to have artists and scientists and the creators of dark arts and dark science. You've got to have rapists and murderers and saints. And they've all been here. We've been testing and perfecting. And here's the ultimate result of it, is that there are many new gods grown in this new system. There are many, many universes. That's why we call it the multiverse. There are far more than those 2 original universes of the Big Bang. And they are awaiting this event to basically distance themselves from it. As long as these 2 original universes of the Big Bang are sort of joined at the hip, are tied in some very, very substantial way, that conflict is going to be very centered. That's what's created all the energy for this event to happen. But now that that experiment is over, that God is fully awake now, and that this system of karma has been perfected to the point where it's very clear what a soul has to do to earn another level, to get to the first spiritual level, level 5, the 5th dimension, to get to the first God level, level 9, to get to the highest God level, the level of a senior creator, 12. It's now well defined. And yes, there are a lot of these old souls running about outside of Earth that have not taken this bitter pill of reincarnation. Reincarnation amnesia, the latest version of karma. We got to go give them their medicine. That's the next phase of humanity. That's what day 8 of creation is all about. It's kind of like a spiritual Star Trek, where we've got to go inoculate first our galaxy and then this whole universe with this system of training that allows souls to be sorted into universes of like-minded souls, and allow these universes to distance themselves from each other so that they can't exert undue influence on each other. What has to happen to finish that? Well, we've got to get all the Borg souls off Earth. Earth is the central point of this experiment. Always has been. That's why God created it. That's why all the species that have come to the Earth have wanted to come to the Earth. That's why it's been such a center of attention for all the aliens, for all the souls, all the demons, all the gods. This planet is where it's at because knowledge of what was going on in the day 7 of creation has gotten out again. Thanks to the Bible, even though it's only a poor representation of what was going on in day 7. Now I'm giving you the real story. It's going to spread faster. And we are in a battle. We're in a battle for souls. We can drive Borg souls into extinction, and they will be reincarnated in the Borg universe or some other universe of a more Borg-like god or goddess. Or the lesser offenders will be reincarnated on some other planet, in some other species, where they're not going to get in the way of the divine plan. Or they can go participate in some other god's divine plan or goddess's divine plan. Okay? And I can't tell you where you're going to land here in this. I can tell you that your next death and reincarnation experience is going to be very different than you thought it was going to be. And it's going to be highly tied to your nature and your karma. What you're good at, what experience you've had, what you're not so good at, what your shortcomings are. And the souls that are going to be allowed to continue in humanity, in God's universe, in this prime universe. Actually, this isn't God's universe. That's the funny thing, is God now has his own universe, or will when he dies and now is a God-level spirit again. In the new system, he'll have his own universe. Won't need to participate in this prime universe, which is actually the universe of the male demiurge, or the other prime universe, the universe of the female demiurge, the Borg universe. They're going to continue on their merry way under the gods who volunteered to be the guinea pigs for those universes, and they deserve that. They've earned it. And they will continue to be the integration points, the prime universes for those two different teams. Maybe they will come to be more like each other. They will always be based on matter, antimatter, so they cannot coexist. They must develop separately. And this is kind of the primary thing that divides the universes of different gods. You either fall on the matter side or the antimatter side, and that kind of defines your relative gravity, your spiritual gravity of your universe. And once these two universes are separated, i.e., the souls involved in this experiment have been recycled and reborn where it makes more sense, these two universes will finally move apart very rapidly. And that is the next phase of creation, a distancing. We're not ending evil, because nobody can really define evil. We know who our enemies are. We know what we don't like. But we know, at least if you're very conscious at all, you know that what you don't like can often be what somebody else loves. So we're distancing. We're isolating. This is what the multiverse is about. Ultimately, there will be a universe suited to every kind of soul you can imagine. In fact, there might be a universe for every soul if that's what it takes to give all of us enough distance that we don't think they're crazy. Now, that's not going to happen because most of us are very social, and we wouldn't be very happy living in a universe populated by toy soldier level 0 virtual souls. We would get bored with that very quickly. Probably the only souls that are going to be found living long term in that environment are the ones that are so warped and messed up that nobody wants to play with them anymore. And there will be souls like that. And Borg is going to be one of them, I'm almost certain. I don't know. Maybe there's hope for the poor bastard, but I doubt it. A lot of these old souls are set in their ways, and they really like their authoritarianism. They really like to push things around, and they're welcome to it. At any rate, I think that's been a good wrap-up of what I started in the last session, and a good point to stop. We're a little over an hour. I hope you enjoyed it. Like, share, subscribe, interact in any way, ask questions, comment. Anything you have a problem with, you question, I'd be more than happy to discuss it. Till then, this is the Omnist Hour with Rob Trump, and I wish you happy comedy.